Well, welcome back to the How Soccer Explains Leadership podcast. Today, we're really excited to have Pete Kipley here in with us. Now, Pete is a guy that has, he's got quite the resume. It's not your typical soccer resume. I'm going to tell you that right now, but that's what we're going to hopefully have on this show. Pete is the founder of Bolta Soccer, which he's going to talk about a little bit later. But he also spent many years in the music industry. He was a producer, songwriter, musician. He wrote some pretty cool songs, won some awards. If you really want to find out more about him, you can look online. We're not going to get into all that today, mainly because Pete really didn't want to. But what we are gonna talk about is really what Pete knows about the intersection between soccer, life, leadership, what he's learned in all those things. And so, with that, Pete, I'm really excited for you to be here. I don't know if you're excited as I am. I hope you are.
I'm very excited.
All right, cool.
Man, you have got such a good podcast voice. I'm intimidated now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's just years of talking. Really is all it is. You. That's, my wife would attest to that. So we'll nothing. I haven't practiced. Amazing. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with that.
Looking forward to this.
So, with that, Pete, we'll get in a little bit about where we met and that later. But what I want you to do right now is just share your story of how you got to be where you are today as the founder of Bolta Soccer.
Yes.
Training and all kinds of other cool stuff at this soccer facility in the middle of Tennessee.
Well, thanks so much, Phil. I think my story started a lot like I think a lot of other parents of kids who play. We have 4 kids, two of them play. And one of them has all of his mom's DNA. He's absolutely gorgeous boy. And I knew that, I knew he had some talent there in soccer, but kind of being in a different industry, maybe I didn't quite realize to what level he might find some potential in that sport until at that time somebody did come and watch him play and told us about an opportunity with a club here in Nashville that was just bringing ECNL into the area. And he felt like Miles could benefit from that, which was exciting for him. So we did. He tried out for that team and he made that team. And that was kind of just the beginning of the eye-opening experience there for me, mainly hearing coaches implore their players do a lot of the same things that I was imploring musicians or bands to do, which was just work outside of practice. We've got to work on that first touch. And I didn't know what first touch was. I knew a lot about pocket with drums, those kind of things. But it was fascinating to me that the level of expectation that those coaches had for these players. And a lot of those coaches had come in from overseas and I think they were used to kids that were taking a lot more touches than maybe the kids were here. But it kind of started that chapter of this life was just kind of trying to understand what they were saying and then seeing a need to facilitate that for some of those players. There wasn't a facility, a soccer specific training facility in Nashville at that time. And so that kind of started a 2-year process of going to the conferences, talking to a lot of people, and then eventually finding a space and starting off.
And so you're really not doing much in the music side right now. Is that right?
It's true. It's funny because I think I do kind of miss it. I spent so many years doing music, and I always loved it. I think for me, it was, again, when I'm looking in this world that I'm immersed in now, and you see these coaches and these managers and the investment that they are making in those players, not just as players, but as humans. And you can see where they have taken that life leadership to another level. It inspired me a lot because that's really what we were doing in the studio was, yes, we've got to make a great record. We've got to make great greater. But at the same time, here's somebody that's on the road 9 months of the year, a lot like a professional soccer player or college soccer player. Maybe, they're with the same group of people 24 hours a day in a bus. And that was their time to come in and just kind of decompress and have an objective set of ears, listen to their stories. So it was probably half psychology, to be frank with you, which I think really translates over into what we're doing now, especially in the day and age that we're in. with these young minds and kind of going through the year that we've gone through.
Absolutely. We're going to mine a lot of that in the next few minutes on this interview. But I do want to say that, we did meet at probably one of your biggest gigs that you ever played at a family camp. You were sitting up on stage playing bass. I believe it was the bass that week with one of our good friends. Yeah, hey, it was not quite a ska band, but you were rocking out back there. I'm not going to lie. And one of our good friends, Luke Brown, was kind of leading the band. I believe he invited you out. And what really stuck out to me is you were wearing a Man City jersey up on stage. So I knew that I needed to kind of educate you on the finer things of football. But I didn't let that stop me.
Was it too tight, Phil? I felt like it might have been a little too tight.
That's kind of the European way, isn't it? That's the only way to wear a soccer jersey.
Yeah, no, when you're 50.
If you really want to be legit, But I will say that, somebody says, oh, you got to talk to Pete. He's a soccer guy, And so we did. We talked. I think you were out on the field training with your son. He's a keeper. That automatically just, that's my kindred spirit there. And,
yes.
and, if I remember correctly, at the time, he wasn't the tallest keeper. That's really my kindred spirit. And so, we just connected on that. Right. And that it's those conversations we had talking since then that really did make me say, you know what, I got to get Pete on to talk with folks about this intersection that we talk about with that soccer life leadership. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about your philosophy at Bolta. On your website, it says that you're, curators, creators, and connectors. Can you just talk about that a little bit? What you mean by those? What you're hoping anybody coming to your facility will come away with, and how
Absolutely.
others can hopefully learn from that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I think I'm going to start back with the very beginning of when we started Bolta. I think in my mind it was, is it the nicest turf? Is it the best balls? Is it the great machinery? Is it the satellite trackers? Is it all of everything? And I kind of went down that path through a bit of naivety at the beginning, thinking that would impress people, and very, very quickly realized the human element in this. It's a ball, it's a few cones, and a great trainer. Somebody that can invest in not just that one session, but the many years that lead up to whatever it is you want to accomplish as a player. And to me, I realized that this is a good opportunity. I feel like soccer is growing very fast. We have a new MLS team in our town. First year, they're doing amazing. Very proud of them. But as you well know, like soccer, up until maybe this year, where everything's kind of been put a little bit on pause, has become such a viable sport option, particularly for girls here in the States, but for a lot of guys too that you're seeing. And now I think we've got 11 U.S. men players that are playing on Champions League teams in Europe now. That's going to greatly improve our chances, not only at just getting in this year to the World Cup, but doing well, having those players perform at those levels, and then bringing that back to this experience here. But as I started just meeting more and more kids, more and more parents, coaches, players, I realized that this is not a company that we're building. This is a culture that we're building. This is and culture is so important, especially when you're melding the minds and how the mind and the heart and the body work with young players. And to me, it was, I just had hoped to be able to find like-minded people. I don't actually do the training. I curate the trainers. And I feel like in our neck of the woods, I couldn't be happier with the trainers that we have. I feel like they're the best, but it's just a good culture. And that we really experienced that during this pandemic, where all of a sudden we got to shut down. Hey, it's mandated. So that means we had to shut down. And that's where we kind of started. I feel like the cloth in our fabric just began to get a lot stronger, and finding people that see, themselves and the players that they train, and don't just look at this as how can I get through 60 minutes as quick as I can, So that's what we're doing on the curation side. On the creation side, what we're trying to do is create more opportunities for players, whether they're coming in from overseas or if they're coming in from, regionally, to be able to perform in front of, whether it's coaches at USL clubs or MLS clubs or at colleges, trying to create opportunities. So instead of just having hey, we got, buy 5 60-minute, sessions in a package, but what we're really trying to do is focus that programming into, hey, where do you fit and what we might be able to do for you in the future? So just kind of trying to create opportunities. And that's the focus that I kind of have there at Bolta.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I was really just impressed with those three things, and also talking about the connectors, which I think goes to something else you talked about earlier today in this conversation, with the idea of, how you got in the music industry is very similar to how you're seeing the kids are getting into the soccer,
Yes.
the not business, but the idea of college, the idea of pros, the idea of getting to the, that next level, whatever it is, right? You have the next level of music, you have the next level of business, you have the next level of whatever it is, right? So what are those parallel things that you've seen as you learn that our kids can learn from, but also people that are coming out of college, people that are coming into the real world, so to speak? You know what I mean? Hopefully y'all know what I mean by that. Obviously the soccer pitch is the real world, but to go into
right.
the business world, right? To be able to take what we're learning to that life, those life lessons.
Yeah, I remember when I was dreaming about getting into the music industry as a producer over several years, and the similarities they're just uncanny. You've got to do the work. You've got to continue to get better at your craft, whether that's your instrument or whether that's writing. I believe that songwriting, you use a muscle to do that, and you've got to keep that thing fit to be able to make sure that you're producing the best that you can on average there. But what really helped me at the beginning was finding mentors, finding people that saw something in me and decided to make an investment. And that's what got me to Nashville, was a couple guys that were here that were doing it, that felt like there was some potential there for me. And I'll never forget these guys for the rest of my life. So they were like coaches, mentors, friends. Same thing here in what we're doing with soccer, is trying to identify those players that we feel like we can really assist in going to the next level. And a lot of that boils down to the philosophy that, yes, we want everybody to be engaged and love the sport. You've got to love it to want to stay in it. But you will see a few players that you can tell have got that potential to go to that next level. And I feel like, especially now with COVID, and you're looking at the dead period for recruiting continually being extended. And then these girls, maybe they're sophomore, junior, seniors, that are used to having a social high school soccer experience, are kind of stuck at home with their moms and maybe brothers and sisters, and they can't go out. It's, I feel like a lot of these players are wondering, am I even going to go to college? Will there be college? It's a whole lot for a young player to deal with from the mentality standpoint. So for me and our crew, like even tonight, it's the district finals here in Franklin for the girls. And we go to these games because I know they love to feel the support and they love to see, hey, I just trained with Andrew Saturday and he's here to come and watch, and kind of going that extra mile to just be sure that these kids mentally, emotionally, as well as physically, are able to perform at the levels they need to for right now.
Absolutely. And what I've tried to talk about with my kids is, use these experiences that you have with the coaches as you're getting recruited, as you're having conversations, whether it's a phone call, whether it's a visit, whatever it may be. This is what it's going to be like in the future. Use this to practice for your future interviews for jobs, right?
Yes.
To also know how to evaluate whether you want to work for someone. as you're looking at schools. Do you really want to play for this coach? And from the
Yes.
coach's side, and really from that leadership side too, I think something you said really stuck out to me was, and I just think back to my different interviews when I was, coming out of law school, looking at law firms, or, just talking to different people and doing the hiring side, that if the people aren't really talking about their culture, if they're not really talking about why basically you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And from that other side of it, from that hiring side, right? From that coach's side, the only coach that there were a few coaches that and I'm not going to name any names at this point, but I will give you a hint that they're likely going to be on this show at some point, that my daughter, when she was being recruited, that I said, I would be okay with you playing for them. Each one of them said, who you are as a person is as important, if not more important, than who you are as a player.
Absolutely.
And they meant it. You could tell they meant it. They weren't just saying it as part of the pitch, right? Because they had examples. And I think that's really important for us to remember too. And so what do you think about that? Have you seen that in the conversations?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you bring up a very, very, very helpful point, not only for parents that are walking their kids through that process, but more importantly for the kids themselves. When you were saying, hey, use this time to practice, when you're in that, especially now. So now, everything is almost like backlogged and jammed. I mean, coaches haven't been able to come out to games, haven't been able to come out to showcases. They're really dependent on guys like us, kind of helping them navigate the talent pool regionally and sending video. But as these girls and boys too, but as you're talking to coaches, I think it's very nerve-wracking, that first telephone call, because you don't really know what to say and you're nervous and maybe you don't know the right questions to ask, but then maybe the next call goes a little better. And then maybe you text the coach and you get to have the communication again. And I think it's understanding that, hey, this is just as much a part of my training as actually training, is learning how to have a conversation, how to speak with an adult, and then understanding those bullet points of what it is that you're looking for and navigating. The number one thing you've got to do when you're looking at a school is make sure that school is going to be the best for the rest of your life. Right. Not just that you'll get a starting spot, your freshman year, and then wait a minute, I want to be a doctor. Why am I going to the auto mechanic school? Or I want to be an engineer. Why am I going to the medical school? Finding out those schools, narrowing them down into what you want to ultimately become. Because even if you make it to the next level of soccer beyond college, there's still a gigantic piece of life waiting for you at the end. Maybe you'll want to, work into coaching or something, but odds are there's something else inside of you that needs to come out as well. So I think finding that school, and then you're right. It has to boil down to culture. And sometimes I think that you'll get a sales pitch from a coach, sure, and it's going to be this way, and then you go, it wasn't that way. But understanding that, hey, what I'm doing, I'm becoming a part of a team, and a team is more than just me. I've got to be sure that I can relate with the coaches, and I think narrowing those things down is going to be extremely helpful.
Absolutely. And this is kind of a side note, but I will remember when I was, one of the best pieces of advice I ever received when it came to choosing like a job, or even when I was looking at law schools, the people said, interview, not officially, but interview the administration and talk with them about their experience. Because you know what? They know everybody as well as anybody. So like the receptionist, for instance, talk to the receptionist. They know the culture and they'll talk, because you're out in the lobby for 10, 15 minutes, right? So when you're going to interviews, when you're going on recruiting visits, don't just focus on the players and the coaches, which are important, but talk to other people who are around and say, is this legit? Like, is this real?
Yes.
And they'll know, and they'll tell. And you'll be able to tell, right? And so those are things that I think are just important for life, to be able to understand what that looks like. And I can tell you, watching my daughter on those calls that I just had these flashbacks. There's a little PTSD, I'm not going to lie, because it was painful watching her on some of those initial calls. But you know what?
Sure.
She did get better. Now she's still not super comfortable because it's partly personality as well. Certain personalities will have no problem. They'll just go do it. No big deal. Other ones are going to struggle more with it. But she got a lot better, more comfortable, because she realized, you know what, if it's a good call or a bad call, you hang up and life goes on. And that's just the same for anything that you're doing, right? We put all this pressure on ourselves. And at the end of the day, it's like, wait a sec, that wasn't that big of a deal. So the other thing it was interesting to me is when you're talking about the curation and the curating coaches, it just made me laugh that you're just a producer in a different arena, right? Like that's basically what you're doing. I mean, very similar, right?
Very similar. It's, just kind of bringing that band together and
you're just bringing the talent, the best people, and you know what you're best at and what you're not best at. And I think that's a big part of leadership as well, right? Like, you know what you're good at, what your areas is, but you want to bring in people better than you in the things that are really important. And so hopefully. All right. So let's move on to one of the other things we wanted to talk about. Really just, I want to hear what you're learning and what you're seeing about the game, because as you said, you're not this lifelong soccer dude. It's not like you grew up like I did, age 4 to pretty much 46, just being a part of the game and it being a part of me, right? You're kind of coming in with your kids from the outside, learning about it. And there's such a value to hear that, what you're learning, what you're seeing. And I just want to hear from you what you're learning about the game, what you're learning about all of this, particularly as it relates to the mental side of the game. What have you been seeing?
Wow, gosh, you kind of closed that with the highlight. I will back up, and I really want to spend a lot of time talking about that piece, because I think, as you're looking at breaking down a player, and again, it's not rocket science. We're not going to be working with a 9 or 10-year-old the same way we're going to be working with a 21-year-old pro or a 15 or 16-year-old with lots of potential to do one of the other, but you're focusing on technique, first touch for sure. And then, let's work. The thing that I love so much about the trainers that we have is they come at it, have been able to marry that technique and that tactical piece better than I've ever seen. Because really, when you have a coach and you're playing at a high level, you're kind of expected to have the technique, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you got somebody that's responsible for speed and agility, for your fitness. And then a coach kind of needs to be focusing on tactics. Yep. On, okay, what are the combinations that work? What are the packages I can send out? What do I do in this situation? Who's the next team I'm playing? That's where their focus has got to be there, as opposed to, wow, we've got to send this kid off to get a better. You need to kind of have the first touch there. But, working on mentality was definitely, I think, maybe number 4 in those pillars. If you have technique, tactical, fitness, speed, and agility, and then mentality. And maybe 4 was way over here to the right. That was a long number 4. Now it's a completely solid number 1, because you're just dealing with so many more issues than we were dealing with last year, or players that were, I think anytime you have a global pandemic, it's gonna flip a lot of things around. But I mean, it was just incredibly upsetting and challenging to see players kind of coming in with long faces, because, wow, I'm sure that the tryout process was the same in California as it was here. It was no contact. Mm-hmm. So if you're a defender, you're not really going to be able to show your best qualities if they're running one drill that makes a striker and a keeper look good. Right. And boy, I sure hope my center back can put in a good cross. Well, they're kind of used to defending crosses more than putting them in. Right. So if they make them, just a lot of those kind of pressures. But, my main concern isn't what's happening with them today or tomorrow or this week. It's kind of what's going to be happening with them in 3 years, 5 years, based on what these kids have gone through. And you add to that the pressures that maybe some parents will put on those kids, which is something I really feel like we need to talk about. And on top of the pressures that they have for themselves and trying to reacclimate to society, because you can't really go to football games, can't really go to a prom. It's like, okay, we've got to work in these small groups. So kind of really focusing on making sure that we're communicating with, like, how are you? We're building that trust, and I think for us, we've done a good job of having guys and girls that are just unbelievable trainers, because I think a lot of times it's good to have somebody that, wow, you're playing pro right now. I want to play pro. Having them say, hey, how are you doing? Like, really, how are things at home? How are things with your teammates or your friends? And just kind of breaking it down to the bare bones of communication with these kids and making sure that we're looking out for them mentally. Yep. As the priority. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. No, I think that's so huge for parents to hear, for coaches to hear, for, I think, also business leaders to hear, for, teachers to hear, for people who are impacting anybody that's under you. I think as a leader, you need to hear that very clearly, that you need to, I think it also is important to study the individual as well, and to know how they react to different stimulation, to different encouragement, yes, to different things that are part of what they are, talking about here. So I think those are all critical aspects of just, I think, life, is to know who you're talking to know what that impact of your words and your actions and your tone will have on them. And so with that, I think what you talked about, and something that, we don't really need to go into a lot of detail and give a lot of examples of it, because I think anybody who's been around youth sports at all has seen parents that are micromanaging, parents that are pressuring. And sometimes it's healthy, and sometimes it's really unhealthy. And so, as far as I say, pressuring and micromanaging, I don't know many times that's healthy, but there are times where the encouragement, and certain kids will be encouraged and inspired in different ways than others. So to look at one and say that's wrong may not be having the whole story. But with that, what have you seen with that? What are your, and I would say, kind of bring in your experiences in the music industry as well, to talk about really how have you seen that impact the players, the musicians, whatever, and what would you encourage people to do to hopefully make that so it's not really as much of an issue in the future?
Yeah, I think that's where the rubber meets the road right there, is that parent athlete relationship. And I'm happy that I get to speak from both sides of that coin. A lot of our trainers are, the late 20s, they don't have kids yet. So they don't quite understand what, but they definitely had parents. And it was funny because even the trainers that we have, half of them had the right kind of soccer parent, and the other half had kind of an aggressive soccer parent. But, for me, I think I made a whole lot of mistakes at the very beginning. Fortunately, nothing. I'm a positive person to start with. I definitely have such a hard time hearing parents that are, putting that added pressure on their kids, as opposed to keeping things, positive. And number one, just learning to trust the process. In youth soccer, almost every club says, hey, parents, trust the process. For sure, you'll see those kids that, maybe they, put a ball in, maybe they miss the shot, and instead of, you're going to miss shots, you take shots, you miss shots. And if you watch a high level professional take a shot and miss, usually the look on their face is a smile. It's like, okay, we all know I should have made that. I know I should have made it. The coach knows it. The teammates know it. Okay, I'll make the next one. When a lot of times what we see are kids that when they miss that shot, the first thing they do is immediately turn to where the parents are and see if their mom and dad saw it. They don't look at the coach or the team. That's the first thing that they do, because they know it's going to be a long ride home, maybe for just missing a shot. I think there's such a fine line in parenting and being a fan. And then, as a parent, creating opportunity, maybe encouragement to, hey, if this is something you want to do, I'd recommend that you go work with this guy or work with this girl, or maybe we should look to, go to this club. But kind of that's where it needs to end, right there in that relationship. Because what happens with the kids is all of a sudden they're feeling like their worth to a parent is based on a performance on a field. which is just planting the wrong seed instantly. Their worth has nothing to do. Miles, if he misses an easy save, we've forgotten about it the next week, for sure. But that cannot be what he feels like secures his value with me as a dad,
Right.
And for us, and I have a feeling you were the same way, we don't talk about soccer ever, unless he brings it up. Like sometimes there'll be a bad game, whatever, maybe 10 minutes, down the road, he'll say, I can't believe this, which I love it when he talks about it with me.
Yeah.
But there's no way that he could take it if I was like, hey, what happened there in the 15th minute? That's an easy save for you. You see, he already knows it. He's already beat up about it. What he needs to hear me say is, hey, I'm proud of you, And I do hope for him and really for everybody, I hope they're giving their best effort, but they're going to make mistakes just like we do, and you learn from the mistakes and try to create that opportunity. But we have one girl in particular whose mom is just a little too much. And it scared me to the point where, she's texting the coach, really not supposed to be, communicating with the coach. The coach needs to communicate with the player. Mm-hmm. But when she would come in even to watch the training sessions, I'd noticed that the player's level would drop probably 50%. That's like, this is very interesting. She's at such a high level here, but then when this shows up, drops down. And I think for me, my encouragement, I love giving talks to clubs, and especially on behalf of parents, and saying, hey, you really do need to trust the process. Not every club is perfect. Not every team or coach is great. You've got, that's great, not so great, but you've at least got to trust the process, that they know what they're doing. Hey, just encourage your kid. It's not rocket science.
No, absolutely. And I think there's so much there that, that could be like half a season, I think, of episodes on what you just talked about there. But I think one of the things I really kind of draw out of that is that idea of a freedom to fail, right? And, to be able to know that. And I think that goes from the soccer field to life, right? I think that goes to, as a parent, they need to understand that you love them. Their identity is not in soccer. It's not in grades. It's not in anything. It's in, they are your child. They are, in my worldview and yours, they're a child of God. That's their identity. And they can play. If they're loving playing, keep playing. If you can make it to that next level, as you said, if they ask you for that advice and the advice, like for me, my kids ask me more because they know that I'm a coach. They know that I know these different things. So they do ask me, and I will give them, because I asked them, do you want the coach or you want the dad? And depending on the moment, they'll say different things. Ultimately, it's the dad always. But after a game, I help coach, I'm the assistant I was on my daughter's team, never the head coach of her, for good reason. We can get into that later. But when she asked, we talked about it, and she knew that when she had a phenomenal game, I talked to her about that, and we told her when she didn't, we talked about the things that she already knew she could have done better, but I didn't bring it up in those different ways because, as you said, here's the thing. It was my wife and my wife played D1 soccer. I went to school to play. We have that in our part of our family. Right. And so we have this saying in our house that when you shank a shot, you don't need everyone to tell you shanked the shot, right? You shanked the shot. Right. And that's basically what you just said, right? And Wayne Rooney hit it up in the upper deck. I've seen him take a shot and it go out of bounds. It was so far to the right. And, those are the realities of life too, is you have those moments where you do shank the shot. And if you have everyone piling on you about how you shank that shot, whether in whatever area of life, it's not helping. In fact, it makes your performance suffer in the future. And so I just want to hear on that idea, that concept, really how you saw that, how you saw that come out in your time in the music industry. Did you see that same thing with the musicians or a similar thing?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny because in that world, shoot, you can have 100 chances and nobody sees it. Nobody hears the flat note. Nobody knows when you missed the fill or you didn't read your chart right. because you just hit stop, rewind, record, and you just get it till it's right. And obviously that's not the way it works in sports, as much as we wish it would. Oh, wait, we can't take a mulligan because I missed the shot, or I put in a bad cross, or I should have parried that goal over instead of putting it right back in. So there is a little bit more pressure there, I think, on where it relates to the athlete, because, I feel like, shoot, musicians, imagine this. Imagine if you're really kind of playing the same team, 60, 90 times a year, with the exact same lineup. You kind of just get it down and boom, you're in. Not really suffering on I guess some bands can have bad nights, but it's much easier to fly by, I think, in that music realm, where, as technology changed, it's interesting. I feel like one thing that's opposite, and not for everybody, but, as technology changed and it became so much easier to fix issues, through a computer than having to just get it right the first time, that became a little bit frustrating, because, you do want, even at Bolta, I want that product to be at a 10 every time, every session, so, hey, listen, if you're onto your third session as a trainer and wow, you don't feel like you can bring that full hour value, or 90, depending on what it is, you just got to let me know. And then we'll bring this other trainer over. It's okay to say, hey, I'm not going to be, at my 10, but that's another piece of the pressure for the players. I feel like they feel like they've got to be at a 10, and, good for them when they are. For us, especially, in our training philosophy, we want you to make mistakes. Make the mistake. But we also want you to be engaged and quick to learn, to understand that that's the mistake. And then, okay, this is how I begin to correct it. So if we're working on somebody getting a left foot, we're not going to be able to fix that in 15 minutes. That's going to take a long time. But if it's those tiny mistakes, whether it's your positioning or your touch, especially, being able to understand, hey, I blew it. Bad touch. Okay. That's right. We've got to fix it, clean it up. And that's another thing too, is, we really we love working in groups as opposed to individuals, mainly because it's not an individual sport. You're playing with other people, and the sessions are able to move faster and have more energy. But sometimes somebody you're training with is going to give you a bad ball, and then you don't have your touch, you don't make your shot, and the trainer's chewing you out. And they're complaining, hey, she didn't give me a good ball. Well, that is so much like life, isn't it?
Yep.
How many times do we get teed up with a good ball in life? But it's that thing. It's understanding, okay, how do I respond to a bad ball? Okay, I'm gonna have to learn how to fix that, and then not say anything, because odds are you're gonna give a bad ball to somebody the next play.
Absolutely. That's funny you say that, man. Like I remember back when I was teaching a course at university, and I assigned group projects, and never fail. Every time I assigned a group project, I'd get people complaining left and right about it, because they knew they were going to be the one ended up doing everything. Right. And what I told them, though, during that, I said, here's the deal. This is life. So this is how life works. The vast majority of your jobs are going to be group projects at some point.
That's right.
And there will be times where you get handed, as you said, garbage, right? Like that's the part that, the three other people, and I've seen my kids do group projects. I've seen other people do projects. I've done group projects, and it happens virtually every time. And my daughter's like, Dad, every time I'm always doing. I said, you know what? Do it with everything you got, because you know what? At the end of the day, your teacher doesn't care who did what. But if you want a good grade,
That's right.
You got to do it. Right. And so in soccer, when that bad ball comes, you better make the most of that bad ball. When I was a lawyer, I'd get stuff put on my desk that was terrible writing, just awful. I'm going, how these people pass law school? Like, I have no idea. But when I gave it to the next partner who was in line, he didn't care what came on my desk. He cared what I put on his desk. And those are the realities of life, right, that come up that, and I think as a leader, though, as the teacher, I did say, though, with your team, if you guys, at the end of it, I'll give you the opportunity to evaluate your team. And then I will take that into account. And honestly, the only thing I ever saw, which actually encouraged me, was people saying, so-and-so did more work. I never saw someone throwing someone else under the bus. And I knew who was doing what. And so at the end of the day, I'd give that person who I knew did everything. If they didn't throw him under the bus, I gave them an extra few points.
Nice.
Like as you would in an organization, if you saw that as a leader, you could do that. But if you see people throwing people under the bus, I'd have a conversation with them and say, hey, look, that's not teamwork, right? At the end of the day, like, I get what you're doing. I get that you're bitter, but when you're on a team, it's your team performance that's going to do it. And so, if you can talk to other people. Anyway, those are things that I saw. So any thoughts on that? That was a lot there.
That's what makes me smile. I mean, especially in a game setting, when you're familiar with a player and you know what their abilities are, when you see them handle a situation, I mean, especially when we're talking about putting balls in, it's going to happen. They're going to miss you. But finding those players that are able to quickly adjust, it's going to be so helpful, I think, in life.
Yep.
I think for us, it's any given day, the life of an adult, when you've got kids and you've got your wife and business, and not everything's going to go perfect, but finding that way to say, okay, I gotta fix this and then push through. And like you said, do the very best that you can with it. But I feel like that's so much, I mean, a part of becoming a player and understanding, especially as you're growing and proceeding, it's coaches will always tell you it's about finding that space, creating that space, coming into support. And it all works hand in hand. If you see somebody that's given you a ball, maybe they've been under pressure, that it helps you understand, okay, I'm going to help this guy out. I'm going to take a good touch and move through. But I think finding, again, the parallels, they are so funny with soccer and life, like finding that way to, okay, I need to cover up for this guy. I need to help my wife out with this. That's right. But a lot of times we need the help too. That's right. And it's just kind of nice to know that, wow, they got my back. That's awesome.
Exactly. That's when you see the well-oiled machine teams out there who are playing together, and it's like clockwork. If someone gets out of position, someone's covering them. And the teams that get burned are the ones that people think they're too important, or they're this or they're that. And you get the prima donnas, and they're not going to cover for someone. And then the whole, it's a weak link sport. You're going to be as strong as your weakest link. And so those are all things that, we'll talk more and more about on this show. And, I'll have to get you back on. We got a lot more we can talk about, but we are coming towards the end of our time together. But I do want to talk about a couple more things. One of the thing is the idea of just what are some of the qualities? We've talked about some of the coaches, some of the trainers that you have, but what are some of the qualities of the best coaches that have come through your clinic, or who you have, seen coach your kids, that you've just, experienced? What are some of those qualities that are kind of the common threads amongst those coaches?
And that is a great question. I feel like, I think you can even see it in coaches that you don't know personally. Like, for instance, let's take Jurgen Klopp. Okay, for some reason, he has found this way to lead kids that are a little bit more difficult to lead than we were, maybe. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Some of the millennial kids and the way that they communicate, you'll see other coaches that just kind of they fall out. It's because they're not able to adapt to the way. We've got to learn how these kids communicate. Yep. Because we can't, otherwise it literally sounds like we're speaking in a different language. But that's okay. That's just the way that life works. But you're looking at these kids now, and I think you bring up a great point by what you said there in that last segment. We really work hard on perception, both as trainers and as players, and I want to touch on that. As it relates to the qualities that I like to see in coaches and trainers, but even as it relates to the player in situations like tryouts or ID camps, a coach is going to notice how you react to the outcome of the situation. And if they see you just pounding the pitch or screaming or ripping your head off, they're not really going to want to bring that player to their team. Yeah. It's like that reaction. And okay, yeah, you'll notice if you're working with a 7-year-old team, if they lose, what do? They all just start crying until they get their juice box and their little fruity fruits, and then everything's fine again. but helping people to understand how to take control of their reactions and take control of those emotions. And you know what? It's funny if you watch, any of the top players, come out on a Sunday morning or Champions League game, whatever it is. The thing I notice is a lot of them have the same expression on their face when they walk onto the pitch as they do when they walk off. It's the same expression, whether they won or whether they lost. It's, hey, they had a job to do. They understand that this is a responsibility, and by working yourself up emotionally, it's not going to really impress anybody.
Yeah.
I feel that for these kids too, and maybe more especially for the kids. Trying to come to that balance of the pressure that they're putting on themselves, the pressure that they're feeling from their teammates and their coaches, and then that trying to balance that pressure that they're feeling from the parents, which, again, it's always going to come back to that. And I don't know if you notice this, but your kid will never listen to you. That's just a rule. That's the way it is.
Once they hit about 12, I think once they hit 12, it's all
exactly.
over, right?
If you tell them, hey, listen, I feel like maybe you should be up off the balls of your feet. It's no, you don't know what you're talking about. And then the very next day, the coach says, hey, I need you up off the balls of your feet. They're like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's right. So I feel like the quicker that we can come to that realization as parents, the better. I feel like with the trainers, when you're looking for those qualities, this isn't a fast food industry. These are kids that, okay, wow. We love it when we see, young players that are, you can't even tell what foot they are because they're just executing both sides so freely. And those kids are the easiest ones. But I feel like looking at that, taking that kid into account as to, okay, where's this kid come from? And where does this kid want to ultimately go, and finding that way to build that trust. A lot of times, on first sessions, kids will be scared to come because they're afraid that they're going to get yelled at, or I did this wrong. But finding those ways to present yourself as somebody that can be trusted as an adult, because that's what we are. We're adults if we're coaches, if we're trainers.
That's right.
The coaches that, to me, it's a fine line, and you're going to see, watch any of the shows and you see the coaches screaming their heads off in the locker room. It's kind of a little bit of a part of the job, but it's like anything else. It's that balance of realizing, wait a minute, am I going to be that coach that looks at a player as a commodity, as just somebody to help me get through a season? Or am I going to look at this player as somebody that I could have in my life for the rest of my life? And I don't think every relationship works out that way, but so many of the great players, and every one of our trainers has a story of that one coach. Yeah. That one coach that, for some of them, maybe it was younger, some of them, maybe it was college. We're very, very fortunate in Nashville. I feel like the college coaches here, particularly on the girls' side, are just off the chart. They get it. They get the full experience. And you'll hear this from all the girls. It's like, yeah, I'd love playing for him, or I love playing for her, because I know that they're more invested in me as a human and as somebody that can have an impact on this world, more than as a player that can only have an impact on a game that we're all going to forget about in two weeks, 2 months.
Yep. I love that. I love the idea about, and whether it goes to parents talking to coaches and having them communicate a message, whether it's coaches understanding that they may not be the best person to connect with a particular player as well. We just had Paul Jobson on, head coach of Baylor Soccer. He's awesome. We're very fortunate to have gotten Paul on, but we talked about it on there too. The idea that there's some players that he doesn't connect as well with as some of his assistants. And, in law firms, in businesses, in organizations, whatever it is, there may be some people that connect better with others. And for you as a leader to know that, to be able to say, hey, here's the message we want to get across to them. Can you connect with them and make sure that they understand that, whatever it may be? So I think that goes at really every level, and that goes to relationships as well, that there's certain things that, will be communicated better by one more than another. So, with that, that's something that actually kind of leads into the next question. I want to say that this is definitely, a lot of these questions have been off script, which is typically what we're doing on this
I
show. Just
love
a
it.
heads up, folks out there. And you may not, I don't know, but I'm assuming you do, given how much you've been thinking about soccer. But are there things that, maybe one or two things that in your house you use the principles of soccer to help you to parent, help you in your marriage, help you, that you could help others with out there?
Absolutely. That's a great question. A great analogy too. I think obviously we can kind of touch on what we already talked about with
Sure.
just, hey, I'm just going to handle the bad ball. My 7-year-old screaming about the wrong flavor popsicle. Yeah, I'm gonna let that one go this time. I'm gonna just take that and respond this way. To me, I think I lived such a create your own rules kind of life, out there in the music business for sure. And in some ways it's still similar now, but what I love about soccer is the law and the rules of the game and the respect for it. And when a ball completely crosses the line, that ball is out. And that's it. It's not, oh, maybe it stayed in, or like so much of life can be where it's easier to bend those rules. And, I love the order of soccer. I love the order and just the philosophies, the methodologies, as you're progressing through the sport. That's helped me just a whole lot as a dad, as a husband, hopefully, realizing, wait, I just need to put more order here. These are the hours that I'm going to be here with the family, or wow, that garage is kind of looking a little bit messy. That would never, ever fly with Jurgen Klopp. I promise you, he wants your locker clean.
That's right.
So I feel like, and to me, the beauty of it, so our facility is one of two facilities right where the two major interstates meet in Nashville. So it's a beautiful skyline, but the facility across from us is the Adventure Science Center, which is, where you go and you learn about stars. And it's world-class here in town. But, it's so interesting to me how similar a ball flying through the air is exactly like life, because you could have the same ball being kicked onto a different pitch and it's going to bounce the complete different way. It's learning to adapt to this spinning, just beautiful object that is going to be a blessing or a curse, depending on what net it goes into. I don't know. I love the beauty of this sport, and I don't know. It's hard for me to find people that aren't beautiful people like you that don't love soccer. Maybe it's that whole kind of outlook on life.
We went a lot more philosophical on that one than I expected to. I'm not going to lie. That was fantastic. We went Science Center. We went you're like waxing right there. You're waxing philosophy going on. That was sweet. That's great. I love it. And that's what you can tell is that, they call it the beautiful game for a reason. I think it's part of it on the field. Yes. But I think also just how it impacts people and how it really is a way that you can communicate with people all around the world, which is part of the reason we're doing this show, is to be able to help you to communicate it with your kids, communicate it with others, and communicate it with, anybody that you're dealing with. So last question, I just want to hear from you if you have any books or movies or podcasts, other resources that have really impacted your thinking on what we're talking about on the show, how soccer, leadership, or both can help us to flourish.
Man, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I definitely got maybe a little over immersed in the whole watching every single soccer game and every single show about it. I love watching those behind the scenes shows that are on Prime, starting with City and then Tottenham. I'm not sure how ultimately realistic those interactions are, but still it's a lot of fun to be able to see that, again, tie that human element in. And if you're looking for something to watch about soccer, just get on Prime. The last two seasons with the Leeds United story, that team is just fantastic. But I think even learning the lessons from they're so fortunate with the coach they were able to bring in. And then even through disappointment of, not being promoted in that first year, the fact that he stayed, I will forever be a Giant fan.
Yeah,
I will cry when he moves on to the next soccer life, wherever that is, because that's the measure of a man. And every one of those players said, we're bringing this.
That's right.
We're bringing this next year. And it's a lot of fun to see them experiencing, even through COVID,
Yeah.
what they're experiencing. But
they're a really easy team to like. They're a really easy team to like and to be a fan of. A good friend of mine, hopefully he'll be on the show here in the future. A big Leeds fan. He lives in Leeds. So I've been, don't tell anybody. There's, going to be, other than all the people who are listening. But, as a United fan, I'm not supposed to like Leeds. But as you said, it's hard not to like them right now, given what they've been through. Now, when they play United, I'm not gonna be a big fan. However,
sure,
every other game, I'm like, man, these guys, not only are they fun to watch, but like you said, watching that on Prime, but also following it with my buddy, it's just been a lot of fun to follow them and their story. And I think a lot of these lessons we're talking about, you can learn from those things. One show, have you watched? It reminded me of it when you talked about finding the right person to communicate a particular message. Have you been watching the Ted Lasso show at all?
You gotta watch it if you haven't watched it. The first 2 episodes, I'm like, well, what's going on here? I wasn't sure. But then after that, it is amazing. Guys, if you haven't watched the Ted Lasso show, watch it. It's on Apple TV immediately.
It's fantastic. I will say, just as a disclaimer, there is language. It's a British, it's got a lot of British stuff, going on. So there's, a lot of F-bombs, a lot of language. So younger kids, probably not for them. But even some of the older kids, depending on that, I just want to make sure you understand that. However, there was a scene, I'm not going to ruin it, not a big spoiler, but there's this Nate who's the equipment guy, right? And tons of leadership lessons. I think we're going to do an entire episode on the leadership lessons of Ted Lasso. I'll have to get you back on it for that one. But one of the things, he brings in Nate, this equipment guy, to give the locker room talk. And I'm just going to tell you, it was fantastic. That's all you need to know. But he knew that was the guy who needed to give that message on that day. And it was awesome. So with that, Pete, any last thoughts that you just want to give, words of wisdom? I don't know how it's going to beat the Science Center and the floating ball that's spinning with everything philosophically.
I don't know.
But I will just say, hey, if you got something, go for it. If not, I just want to thank you for being a part of this.
No. This means so much. I love talking about this, and I hope I would just say if you're a parent that came across this, I hope it meant something to you, and feel free to find a way to reach out. You can go to the website. I'd love to talk to you about the lessons that I've learned about being a soccer parent and the lessons that I'm learning. Still, it's an ongoing process, but man, I'm really proud of you, Phil. This is awesome and what you're doing, and you're a great example and leader as well. So I appreciate you letting me be on your show.
Well, thank you, Pete. I look forward to getting this out and having everyone learn from you. And what is it, boltasports.com? Is that right?
Or boltasoccer.com.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're ever in the area, please stop by. Would love to meet you.
It's down south of Nashville in Cool Springs.
It was. Now we're dead center downtown Nashville.
Okay, that's new information for me. I'm glad I said something about it, right in Nashville. So that's fantastic.
A COVID miracle.
Look them up. And also with this show, as you know, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can also check it out at howsoccerexplainsleadership.com. Share it with others. And you can also, I encourage you, if you want to go deeper on these conversations, join the Facebook group. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram. We'd love to further deepen the conversation there. Share anything that you have, any questions, any articles, any other things that you will help us to know how soccer does explain leadership and life and can help us to be better people. And I do hope that you take all that you're learning with this and you use it to help you to understand how you can use soccer to be a better person, to be a better leader, and to flourish in life. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.